That's right.
All right, we're live.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode of the Hill Country Artist Podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to have with me Holly White-Gerht. Holly, first of all, welcome and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me, including me.
Holly, could you tell us where you grew up?
I grew up in Austin, Texas, and then high school in Midland, Texas.
And where did you first get the tinge of a spark around art?
I don't remember exactly, but my mom has a piece of art that I did probably in the first grade and entered some kind of city contest and won. And it was up at the Laguna Gloria Art Museum. But honestly, I didn't think about it much.
Where did you go to college?
I went to UT.
What'd you study?
There at UT, I studied anthropology. And then I also got an art degree 10 years later at Pacific Northwest College of Art in Portland, Oregon.
Wow. What took you out to Oregon?
A job.
And what sort of work did you do professionally before you became a full-time artist?
I've been trying to do art full-time forever, but to pay the bills, I took a job in a lab. My second love is science. So I was working, when I went to Portland, I was working for Intel. It was a very good job.
And tell us about your graduate degree in art. What did that entail?
I have a bachelor's in art from the Pacific Northwest College of Art, and I have atelier training, which is the equivalent of a master's, and that came later in Seattle.
Is the study of art like the study of really any other academic discipline where you study the masters, you study technique and style, you study process, you explore to learn your own style, or is it something different?
Oh, that's a good question. I hadn't thought of it that way, but I think you're making a point there that it is completely different, isn't it?
So tell us about it.
Maybe the performing arts or music would be similar, but it takes a lot of you. It takes not just your mind, it also takes your heart and your guts.
So when did you come back to Texas?
I came back to Kerrville about 7 years ago from Seattle.
What brought you to Kerrville?
My husband and I were looking for a place to wind down towards retirement. Neither of us will ever really retire. And I love the Hill Country. I went to summer camp out here. And as it happens to so many people, I fell in love with the limestone and the fresh water. And so we chose Kerrville.
Which summer camp?
The HUBET Foundation.
Because I moved here because I went to Camp Stewart.
Ah, that's a great place.
And I said when I was 8 years old, if I could ever move out here, I would. And I got to the place where I could.
And you did?
And I did.
Fantastic.
So I've lived here about 2.5 years. So tell us about your artwork. What's your passion around art?
So I mentioned science, right? I think I have a passion for nature and observation. And so my work, even though when I got my bachelor's and I had to defend it with a thesis, it was very theoretical and philosophical, and I love that too. But came back home when I went into observational art, meaning representational. So I paint and draw something that looks like something.
Do you have a studio here in town?
Yes.
And do you do just what moves you, or do you take commissions, or both?
I rarely take commissions. I do once in a while. I do what moves me, and a lot of my energy has gone into teaching in the last several years.
So where do you teach?
I teach at my own school called the Hill Country Atelier.
Tell us a little bit about that.
It started when I went to the Hill Country Arts Foundation and taught some workshops, and I got a little bit of a following from the students. And as I explained the kind of training that I'd gotten from the atelier, not from art school, but from the atelier training in Seattle, they wanted some of that too. So I started an atelier there.
What is an atelier?
So it really is a generic name. It means workshop or art studio, but it has a specific meaning.
So what's that specific meaning?
It is an art movement in this country and in Europe.
So what type of art do you teach?
Classical realism.
And do you draw from Kerrville to Hill Country or even beyond for students?
Yeah, I have a couple of students from San Antonio and Fredericksburg, and one from Medina, two from Medina. I had someone that was driving up from Concan for one workshop. That's a long drive.
Not really.
No.
Not in the Hill Country. We go to San Antonio for a meal. Can you say that's far?
They were coming 3 days a week. I'm still impressed.
That is. Tell us about you as a teacher. How do you teach? Is it, you seem to really have a passion for this. Your heart's in it, your soul's in it. Do you try to convey that part of it? Do you try to convey the eyes and seeing, and or how do you teach it?
Oh, all of the above and then so much more. I give it everything I've got. And specifically, I learned things in the atelier training that is not taught in colleges and universities. It's just not. And
What are some of those things?
how to draw, how to really draw. Can I tell you a little story about that?
You bet.
Okay. When I applied for my bachelor's, my BFA, when I first got into that school, art school, private art school, they looked at my portfolio and said, oh, you know how to draw, so you don't have to take any drawing classes. Okay, so I graduated, and then 10 years later, I'm in the atelier, like starting over. I spent a year from 9 to 5, 5 days a week, drawing. And then I started to learn to draw. It's a lifelong process.
So are you teaching students how to draw?
Yes. So I think what happened is these skills were poo-pooed by modernism, and so they're just not taught anymore. And so people, they don't know how, and they also don't know that they can't. They can look at old masters and think that's beyond them. And I'm here to tell them that it's not.
So tell me a little bit about the art scene in Kerrville or the Hill Country.
The art scene here, I don't know. I'm no expert in that.
No, but you're a part of it.
I'd like to think so. I really tried.
You came
be
to our
a part.
lunch.
Yes.
So you're a part of it in my
Yes.
book.
Yes. There are a lot of artists here, and I applaud all artists who are putting their hearts out there to be seen.
Do you have shows in town? Or
Okay.
have you?
Occasionally, just the Arts Foundation, or that's all here in town that I've shown.
Any of your students, have you had any students who had shows?
Yeah, interestingly, my students tend to be retired doctors and lawyers or lifelong artists who wanted to up their game. So those lifelong artists had already had shows all over the place.
So what do you tell the youngster, I don't want to say young girl, young boy, the first grader or the 10-year-old or the 15-year-old? What do you tell them today about doing art?
Oh, interesting. I think when I'm not in childhood education, but my sense is that there's something very precious to be cherished when a young child is working in art. And when they get to be in the teens, they could start doing a little more, I call this more disciplined art, honestly. I did teach some teens some drawing from the costumed figure, which was a lot of fun. And they could start to learn these skills, but I wouldn't push it on kids younger than that.
So what would you say was the point where you knew this was it for you, in terms of when you were either a teenager or in college, or when did you know this was the passion you wanted to follow, even if you had to work for an Intel or some other corporation to pay the bills occasionally?
Well, then I'm going to take you back to when I was 20 and I was in college, and I took a break. I saw a poster in an elevator, and I signed up for school in Greece, in a Greek island. And I went for the summer, and then I ended up staying there all year. Everybody back home was freaking out. But I went to write poetry, and the poetry teacher said, and the art teacher said, hey, you got something. And that's the first time I woke up and thought, maybe I do want to do something like this.
So my daughter lives in the Pacific Northwest, and I've been visiting her for, I guess, 20 years now. Very different landscape, very different colors. Terrain is very different. How would you, from an artist's eye, how would you compare the Pacific Northwest, whether it be Seattle, Portland, or anywhere in between, with the Hill Country?
Oh, nice question. My experience there is more in the magnificence of the earth, of the mountains, and of the ocean, and of the trees. They're all huge. You come back to Texas, and you know what's big in Texas? The sky. That's very different.
Do you know who the boxer George Foreman is?
I've heard his name.
George Foreman was a world champion boxer in the 70s, and he grew up in Houston. And he will say this publicly, what saved him was a Jobs Corps job in, I've now forgotten the name of the town, but in Southern Oregon.
Mm.
And he said he'd never seen so much green in his life. And it was the trees.
Right.
It's just that. Grants Pass. That's where
Yeah.
they put
Southern
him.
Oregon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in Grants Pass. And so I always think of his story about just you and I see the sky. He saw trees. And that's when he realized something is different here.
That reminds me that the skies are often gray there,
Yes.
except during the summer. And I did a painting with a blue background, blue sky background. And one of the criticisms I got there in Seattle was that the sky was too blue. And I thought, I'm so sorry for you. You've never seen it, have you?
They just said they were experienced. What do you have anything upcoming, any shows or any events or any new classes you could tell us about?
Yeah, I do have something exciting happening. We've expanded the program, the Atelier, and we're moving out of the Arts Foundation and into our own space in downtown Kerrville.
That is exciting. What space downtown?
We have, as I understand, it's the old Shriner Bank. It is at the end of Earl Garrett, where it dead ends into water. And as you're facing the water, we're on the right.
Wow, that's a pretty special space.
It is.
That is great. We are unfortunately near the end of our time, Holly, but before we leave, if our listeners wanted any more information on your atelier or any of the topics we've touched on, what would be the best place for them to
go to Hill Country Atelier? I'm going to spell it in a minute. hillcountryatelier.org. O-R-G. Okay, Atelier is spelled Atelier.
Holly, I wanted to thank you again for taking the time to visit with me. This has been a fascinating visit, and I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.